Members, we come now to the Taxation Annual Rates for 2015-16, Research and Development and Remedial Matters Bill. When we were last debating this bill, the question was that Part 3 stand part. Mr. Chair. I call Stuart Nash.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I'm happy to stand and talk on the Taxation Annual Rates for 2015-16, Research and Development and Remedial Matters Bill. It's a bill with quite a long name, there's no doubt about that, and Part 3 is quite a long part. But in Part 3 there's a whole lot of sort of remedial clauses that change a number of acts, but mainly the Income Tax Act. But there are several sections, Mr. Chair, that I would like to concentrate on and perhaps get a couple of answers for, because there seems to be a level of inconsistency in the legislation that I can't quite get my head around, just being a simple man from Hawke's Bay, of course. If I could have a look at Part 3, Clause 75C. This is, it amends Section CW42 of the Income Tax Act, and we're talking about business income here. What this clause has added, Mr. Chair, is, it quotes, the old law said no person with some control over a business is able to direct or divert to their own benefit or advantage an amount derived from a business. What this is basically saying is that a person is not allowed to divert money away from a charity for their own gain. But what this law has added is other than the trustee, trustees, society or the institution. And I'm not too sure, Mr. Chair, why they have exempted the trustee or trustees, the society or institution from the ability to transfer money away from the business. Because it would seem to me that there are, in fact, a lot of charities that are actually governed by trustees or societies or institutions. And what this is actually doing is exempting a decent chunk of those who are involved in the governance of charities from the condition that allows them to divert money. And I'm not too sure why that is there, and there's a whole lot of inconsistency with that. Mr. Chair, if I move down that same clause, this is CW 42.5, we're talking about Section 75C here, they've deleted in here words to the effect that says to their own benefit or advantage. So what this section is about in the Income Tax Act is it says that it talks about the control of a company. And they say that the Act says that control of a company is basically defined around someone's ability, this is in the Income Tax Act, to divert or direct or divert amounts from the business. But they're deleting to their own benefit or advantage. And yet, Mr. Chair, those words feature significantly throughout the Income Tax Act, and it seems to be a level of inconsistency where that term is used. And I'm not too sure why that is the case, but I just can't get my head around the inconsistencies with regard to that. Mr. Chair, I go down to Clause 75D. This amends Section CW 42B. And again, what it does is it says here, and I'm going to quote, words before the paragraphs replace a trust and its trustee or company whose activities are predominantly with, this is talking about social housing, replace that with a trustee or company whose activities involve. So what it's actually doing, Mr. Chair, is it's redefining in law who can actually take advantage of community housing trusts and companies. So what in the past income tax law said is that to be defined as a community housing trust or company, your activity has got to be predominantly in the area of managing community housing trusts and companies. Now what the law says, Mr. Chair, is that the company or the trust only has to be involved in that business. And I'm not 100% sure what the definition of involvement is. And this is where we get into sticky legal situations, because what we could actually say, we could have a large trust or a large company that says, okay, what I'm going to do, because we know the government is selling down a lot of the state houses into social housing organisations, they may say, we're just going to take 3 or 4 of the houses here, and that will mean that we can take advantage of tax benefits in the Income Tax Act, because we can say, or the company itself can say that we are involved in social housing benefits. So the definition between involved in social and community housing versus predominantly in the business of social and community housing is substantial. And I perhaps see some unintended consequences here. But the other thing that's slightly strange, Mr. Chair, is it removes, as mentioned, it removes the word a trust and its trustees or company, and it's replacing that with the term, and I quote, a trustee or company. Now, I was always under the view, Mr. Chair, that a trustee was a person, Mr. Chair.
Stuart Nash.
Thank you very much. That a trustee was a person who actually administered a trust. So what it's saying here is it's removing the word trust and putting in trustee. So by definition, this is not applicable to a trust, only applicable to a trustee. And maybe I'm getting my legal technicalities mixed up here, but I would have thought that if you put in a trust or trustee, which is again a term that is used throughout the Act, it would have covered everything and it would have made sure that that there was no confusion. And after all, one of the major tests of tax legislation is that it avoids confusion, that it's clear. Mr. Chair, I go down to 75D Part 2, and this is another section to do with charities and business income, and it's added some words. That is, no person with some control over activities other than the entity is able to direct or divert. Now, these are new words. To their own benefit or advantage, an amount derived from the activities. And the reason why I highlight this, Mr. Chair, is I think I mentioned before we deleted the words to their own benefit or advantage. And again, there just appears to be a real inconsistency within the space of about 3 or 4 clauses. Now, I'd like to, and the reason why, I'm unsure. There is probably a good reason. Perhaps the Minister in his infinite wisdom could let me know when it is applicable to use to their own benefit advantage or when it is irrelevant, and therefore why it has been removed from some clauses, however, why it has been added to other clauses of legislation, which again, it seems to me that there must be a good reason for it, but I'm unsure of that reason. Mr. Chair, I would also like to talk about section 76. Now, this amends CW 55BA, and this is about the tax treatment of tertiary institutions and their subsidiaries. What this actually says, Mr. Chair, is that, and it's under a title, exempt income. And what this actually does is it means, or what it allows, is income derived by a tertiary education institution, i.e., let's say, for example, a university, or a tertiary education subsidiary is exempt income. So what this is basically saying, Mr. Chair, is that, for example, a business incubator, which a lot of the universities have, is exempt from paying, income, i.e. doesn't have to pay tax. But the interesting thing about this is to be exempt income, it has to be 100% owned by a tertiary institution or a group of tertiary institutions. And the interesting thing about this is it actually says, and I quote, this is CW 55BA Part 1A 2, so it's quite deep, but market value interest, so this is exempt income, market value interest in a company adding up to 100% when a market value circumstance exists. And the interesting thing about this, Mr. Chair, is I wonder if in fact this may have the unintended consequence of a university incubator, or when a university seeks to commercialise IP that some of its staff has developed. What this will actually do is it will delay, or it will actually stop a university going out to the market to seek equity in order to raise capital. Because once it drops down below that 100% ownership, then it's not exempt income anymore. And one thing that we really want to encourage our universities to do is commercialise a lot of the IP that is resident within our institutions. And there are a number of exceptionally talented academics across the whole university scheme, even though I must admit, Mr. Chair, this is not just about universities, it's polytechs or any tertiary education institution. But what we don't want to do is have an unintended consequence where the university does not go out to the market to seek capital in any way, shape or form, because it knows that it will move from exempt income into income that is taxable. And I think that may be a little bit of a problem going forward, Mr. Chair. And I would like to understand again why. I do. Part of me understands why, because because tertiary educations are exempt from income, because it's a little bit like robbing Paul to pay Peter, where you take income tax off a tertiary institution, then you give it back in terms of other income that the government gives to universities, polytechnics, etc. But I think this may well end up with unintended consequences. But the other interesting thing about this is it talks about the control of a company, and it says where no person with some control over a company is able to direct or divert to their own benefit or advantage an amount derived from the company.
Grant Robertson.
Oh, thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and I'm sure my colleague Dr. Clark will